A crucial new report paints a bleak picture of what could happen if global leaders don't take climate action. The National Climate Change Assessment says by 2050, coastal flooding will happen 5 to 10 times more often than it does now. The report also found that other extreme weather events are likely to get worse and that climate change will significantly damage the U.S. economy unless extreme mitigation efforts are made. It also adds that the effects of climate change will be especially hard felt by indigenous communities. Earlier today, President Joe Biden spoke about the report's findings and the need to address climate change.
This assessment shows us in clear scientific terms that climate change is impacting all regions, all sectors of the United States, not just some, all. It shows that communities across America are taking more action than ever to reduce climate risk.
For more, let's bring in senior national environmental correspondent Ben Tracy. Ben, it's good to see you despite the awful news, but we are kind of used to the effects of climate change, anthropogenic climate change, what we are doing to the environment, and then how we have to go cover it. So talk to us about the key findings of this report.
Sure, it's not all doom and gloom, but let's start with some of the bad news first. This report does say that the impacts of climate change in the United States are far-reaching and that they are getting worse in every region of the country. And they specifically cite a lot of the weather disasters that have been made worse by climate change that have made headlines in recent years, from devastating droughts to extreme flooding to raging wildfires to more intense hurricanes. And to put that in perspective, this report says that the U.S. is now experiencing a $1 billion disaster every 3 weeks on average.
Wow.
Versus one every 4 months back in the 1980s. And these weather-driven disasters are costing the country $150 billion per year. So that really does kind of put into perspective what we all know we're experiencing as we see these headlines about these weather disasters.
I mean, that's the money. Talk about the livelihoods. Tell me about what are the most concerning areas that the report focuses on. It clearly is impacting everybody's lives, everybody's pockets, but what else stood out?
Yeah, this goes from everything from economic impacts to health impacts. You think of health impacts of breathing in, polluted air from wildfires. You think about the economic impacts that this is having on the home insurance market, where some insurance companies are pulling out of markets that are experiencing a lot of climate-driven events, saying, we're just not willing to insure you anymore. So what that could do to property values. So this really does go across the board in terms of where these impacts are going to be. One of the things that I thought was most interesting is they said that if we don't take enough action by the end of the century, you could have millions of Americans displaced from coastal communities as sea levels continue to rise. So on top of everything else we'd be experiencing, you would also have kind of a migration crisis within the country as people have to pull away from those areas.
Absolutely. I mean, climate migration is a very real thing, and yet Miami housing prices are through the roof. So what do we do? What type of climate action do leaders need to take, countries and individuals? What does it recommend?
Well, the biggest thing is we need to quickly and much more quickly cut our planet warming emissions. So these are coming mainly from the burning of fossil fuels, so things like coal, oil, and gas, and move to renewable, cleaner forms of energy like wind and solar power. And there is some good news on that front. This report says that the cost of wind and solar power has dropped dramatically in the last decade. Wind power has dropped 70% and solar power has dropped 90%. They are now some of the cheapest forms of power on the planet. But really what we need to do is stop burning those fossil fuels at the same time. And a lot of this goes to how quickly we do this transition and how we can avoid some of the worst impacts of climate change. The longer it takes, the more of these impacts there are going to be.
Ben, President Biden said he's delegating $6 billion to addressing climate goals. This is the greatest crisis, an existential threat to humanity. Is $6 billion enough?
On its own, no, but that's just one part of the puzzle that the administration has been responding to. They dedicated hundreds of billions of dollars in the Inflation Reduction Act to help supercharge renewable energy and the adoption of electric vehicles. So they're doing what they can, and so we'll have to see how that plays out over time.
All right, Ben, thank you so much.
Thank you.